Hello students and welcome back once again. This is your science teacher here, and this time I am here with the 5th chapter of grade 6 science Ncert textbook, that is separation of the substances. And students, this chapter will be in two parts, and this one is the first part of your chapter number 5. Students, I hope you all have seen your parents and grandparents separating small stones or pebbles from the rice grains, pulses, filtering tea leaves before serving tea, and lot more. And students, the practice of separation of substances is usually required to remove or separate the required substances from their mixtures. Students, in this chapter, we are going to learn and discuss the separation process, the purpose for separation, and what all components can be separated from different materials such as solids, liquids, or gases. And students, then we will be discussing the different methods of separation. And students, this would include gaining knowledge about handpicking, threshing, winnowing, sieving, methods of separation. And students, however, you will learn that lighter impurities require the process of sedimentation and decantation for their removal. Furthermore, we will learn and discuss about the filtration method. And then finally, we will learn about evaporation as a process to separate a mixture of water and salt. And lastly, we will also study about the condensation and its uses. So let's start. Now students, as you can see here the heading, methods of separation. So students, in this chapter, we are basically going to discuss these methods of separating, such as handpicking, threshing, winnowing, sieving, sedimentation, decantation, and filtration. So now let's discuss them one by one elaborately. So students, the first method of separation that we are going to discuss is handpicking. Students, handpicking is a separation technique that is basically used to remove the unwanted impurities from the mixture by hand. And students, in this method, we basically remove the bigger size harmful substances or other useful substances or impurities like small pieces of stones, husk, and dirt from grains of wheat, pulses, and rice. And students, in situations when the quantity of the impurities are not very large, then this method of separation, means handpicking, turns out to be a very time-saving and convenient procedure of separating substances. And students, this method basically involves simply picking out substances by hand and separating them from others. And this method can be used when items differ on the basis of color, shape, and weight. As you can see here in this figure also, these people here separating the pulses on the basis of their colors. And students, the other examples where we can use this method of separation is separating rotten vegetables from basket of vegetables, and separating the stones and insects from rice, separating green grapes and black grape, separating red gram from rice, etc. Now students, the next method of separation is threshing. Students, once after the crop is harvested, stalks are left to dry under the sun. And students, you will amazed to know that a single stalk has some 100 pieces of grain seed joined to it. And students, it is impossible to pluck each grain seed manually as they are very small in size. So students, the method of handpicking doesn't work here. That's why we basically use a method to separate grains from stalks, and that we known as threshing. And students, this method of threshing is basically done by two ways. The first one, as you can see here in this figure, this one is the traditional method of threshing, and the second one is used by combined thresher machine. Now students, the next method of separation is winnowing. Students, as I said in the earlier slide, that threshing is basically a method of separation in which grains are separated from stalk by either machine or by hand. But students, even after the threshing, husk or chaff is still attached to the grain seed. And students, since the size of the two, means grains and the husk or the chaff is quite similar, so neither hand picking nor threshing work here. Hence, there is a method called winnowing can be used here to separate the husk from the grains. And students, in this method, basically lighter husk particles and heavier grain seeds components are generally poured from a height in the direction of current of air. And students, being lighter in nature, the husk particles are basically carried away by the wind, and the grain seeds, being heavier in nature, get separated and collected down. As you can see here, this lady over here doing this process, means winnowing process, and she is basically pouring grains from a height in direction of air. Now students, the next method is sieving. Students, sometimes even after the stages of threshing and winnowing, grain seeds may still be attached to husk, and it may also have collected stones and dust in the earlier stages which needed to be removed. And so students, this separation is usually done with the help of a sieve. Students, this one is called the sieve that you see here. So we can say that sieving is a very simple, convenient and time saving process through which basically particles of different size can be separated from each other with the help of a sieve. And as I said, a sieve is nothing but a simple device with numerous small pores in it that allow the finer particles like flour to pass through, leaving behind any impurities. Now students, the next important method of separation that we are going to discuss are sedimentation, decantation and filtration. And students, out of the three, first of all we will discuss sedimentation. Students, on our daily basis, we basically come across various incidents in which we have to separate one substance from the another to make it useful. And students, for this we use various methods that are basically available by which we can separate substances which are mixed together. And students, sedimentation is one of the simplest separation methods. And students, it is an essential concept that needs to be understood. Students, in this method, basically the dirt and other heavier particles in a mixture settle down at the bottom of the vessels when water is added to it. And students, then when the dust and the dirt particles have settled down at the bottom of the container, then the clear water which forms the upper layer, as you can see here in the first jar, when we add water in the mixture of dirt and other heavier particles, then after some times, being heavier in nature, the dust particles and the other heavier particles settle down at the bottom of the container, as you can see here, and the clear water forms the upper layer. And once the clear water forms the upper layer, then this clear water move to a different container and the dirt and dust is done away with. And students, this method of sedimentation can also work to separate two liquids which do not mix with each other, like oil and water. Now students, the next method after sedimentation is decantation. And students, this technique is basically used to separate two immiscible liquids or a liquid and a solid substances. For example, as you all know that oil and water both are liquids, and students, both are immiscible in nature, means oil doesn't dissolve in water. And students, once we pour oil in water, oil forms a separate upper layer just above the water, so it can be easy the oil to separate out from the water. And students, as we discussed in the case of sedimentation, that when we add dirt and other heavier particles with water, as you can see here, then after some time, being heavier in nature, the dust particle and the other heavier particle settle down at the bottom of the container, as you can see here, and the clear water forms a upper layer, as you can see here. Now students, the process of removing the clear water from this container to another container is known as decantation. But students, the clear water that we get after decantation is not completely pure, so it is necessary to treat this water further, and this can be achieved through the process of filtration. So now in the next slide we will discuss about filtration. So let's move on towards the next slide. Now students, after decantation, the water is treated through the process of filtration. And students, it is basically a process through which smaller particles like dust, etc. are separated from a solution by making the solution pass through a medium, and that medium is basically a filter paper. As you can see here in this figure, this whole process is known as filtration. And students, this medium is such that only liquids are able to pass through it because presence of very tiny or fine pores in filter paper. So first of all, we have to make a solution of sand and water. Then we have to take a filter paper and mold it to form a cone, as you can see here. Then this molded filter paper that we basically mold in the form of a cone is affixed in the funnel, as you can see here in this figure. Now this dirty solution is allowed to pass through this funnel. And students, as I said, that the filter paper contains many tiny or fine pores. So this filter paper acts as a sieve and it allows only the water to pass through it, and hence only the pure water collected in the another tumbler. And students, sometimes this filtration process can also be applied to separate pulp and seeds from the juice, and also used to separate cottage cheese or paneer from milk. Now students, the next and the last method of separation of your first part of chapter number 5 is evaporation. Students, as you all know that evaporation is a process of converting liquid into gas or vapor by increasing the temperature or pressure of liquid. And students, this process is often used to separate salt from seawater, as you can see here in this figure. And as you all know that seawater has a number of salts present in it. So students, to get this salt from seawater, first of all, shallow pits are made along the shore of seawater. Then the seawater is basically collected to these shallow pits. And students, then after some time the waters get evaporated due to the sunlight leaving behind the salts, as you can see here. And students, this common salt is then separated from this mixture upon further purification. And that's how salt is basically obtained from seawater. Now students, the first part is completed here with this topic. Now I will be come back soon with the second part of this chapter. Till then, be careful with your greetings, avoid handshakes, hugs and unnecessary meetings.